Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is David Bianco. Tonight, I had the pleasure of going to an IMAX theater here in Dallas and re-experiencing the classic concert film by Talking Heads, Stop Making Sense. Well, I saw it back in the 80s, and now, seeing it this time, I really had some different thoughts and reflections on the movie and the band and the personnel. That's coming up next here on our Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. So I did a video in late August of 2023 reviewing the original Stop Making Sense single LP to the newly released double LP that had more of the songs that were in the movie. And it, in fact, preceded the release of this in theaters, which were special single-night engagements. And tonight, I was able to see it in an IMAX theater in Dallas, Texas. So it was a late showing, later in the evening, just like it was back in 1984 when I first saw it. Now, back then, I didn't know a lot about the Talking Heads. I'd heard a few songs, so it was a new, fresh experience for me. Tonight, it was obviously a revisitation, but there really were some things that struck me very strongly about the presentation as I viewed it now all these years later. One of the biggest, actually, was ironically the role of Tina Weymouth, who is the bass player in Talking Heads, and her husband, Frantz. They really drove a lot of the rhythm of the songs that were done for Talking Heads. Now, obviously, David Byrne is out front. He's doing the vocals. He's kind of the face of Talking Heads. But really today, I started to realize how much Chris and Tina influence the actual writing and the rhythm of their music. And their music is very rhythmic. And then when you realize that Chris and Tina formed the Tom Tom Club from the 80s when the Talking Heads as a group went on hiatus, you start to really recognize how they were the heart and soul of the beat that became Talking Heads. And for me, that was quite a revelation. Tina is very well versed in playing of the bass, and her moves on stage to the syncopation of the music, you can tell that she is really formational in understanding the music that's being played and not just a simple player of the music, as well as Chris on drums. There's just a integration that is obvious that you pick up on when you see them live and you really start to put the puzzle pieces together. Now, the first time I saw it, the energy and the inflection of David Byrne and his presence was so strong that you really couldn't look away a lot because he was consuming most of the oxygen in the room, so to speak. This time, having known him and having seen him before, it didn't bowl me over as much as it did originally. And knowing that he has a flair for the theatrics, you recognize that his presence is in fact somewhat self-elevating in some ways. And now in reading some of the books that have come out and some of the interviews that have been done, we start to realize that, yeah, David was bigger than life and he saw it that way and he wanted others to see it that way. But yet there was really this heart and soul that was part of Talking Heads that was there and somewhat understated with Chris and Tina. And really that was in fact so integral to what kind of sound Talking Heads has. Now, this often happens when you have a band where you have a lead person and they basically take a center stage and they are not, in fact, as engaged in the music beyond their frontmanship. Now, David, of course, was a writer of this music, but not solo. You would think it by looking at him and by how he's been represented as Talking Heads. But you come to recognize there certainly is more to this, and all four band members actually contributed greatly to the writing. Now, looking at the Tom Tom Club and the style of the music there, and in that, Tina actually does sing a bit because she doesn't sing at all, nor does Chris in Talking Heads. That merely is for some backup singers and for David Byrne. So you really start to recognize that there is, in fact, this bigger-than-life group as a whole that makes up the sound of Talking Heads. And that really, to me, was a revelation in watching the movie now and picking up on that and then doing some research on it and recognizing that aspect of the band. And in fact, Tina made a comment that, over time, David really didn't know how to return friendship, that he really was, in fact, very self-centered somewhat and self-focused. We know he's on the spectrum. That's come to be known over time. And back then, of course, we didn't even have that terminology. So there's reasons behind it. But in fact, coming to recognize that there was a bigger-than-life contribution behind the scenes. And, when I watched Tina playing and I watched Chris playing the drums, my mind told me the term good soldiers. It was like they were good soldiers while David was out front and consuming all the oxygen and taking all the accolades, more or less, in the band. And unfortunately, that does happen. But it was really quite revealing to me to see that this young lady had such a powerful effect in the writing and in the rhythm, as well as her husband Chris, and recognizing this aspect of the band beyond just the face of David Byrne. If you ever get a chance to see Stop Making Sense, do so. It's very well done. It's very fresh. It builds. They build the show basically up from David doing a solo of Psycho Killer, and then they bring Tina in, and then they bring pieces of the stage up with the drums and the keyboards and the percussion, and it just builds. And then they really get into the material. It's a very rewarding auditory and visual experience. And I really enjoyed seeing it again. But interestingly enough, I now have a whole different appreciation for the band as a whole, not just the genius of David Byrne. So those are my thoughts on this movie. If you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate if you'd click on the bell below and select the all option. A thumbs up or like is always welcome, and comments are welcome. If you've seen the movie, what are your thoughts? Have you read anything about the band or heard anything about these things? Because it really was revelatory to me in the viewing of this movie. So for now, I'll say goodbye and thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time on our next Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.